It's 3 a.m., and you're awake for one reason. Not stress, not a bad dream, a tooth. A specific, low, radiating throb that makes your whole jaw feel like it belongs to someone else. You've already run through the options. Painkillers, cold water, lying very still and hoping it forgets you exist. Somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a dentist's office you're going to have to call in the morning, and a small, familiar dread about what that call is going to cost. You already know how this ends. You'll survive the night. You'll deal with it in daylight, like every version of this pain has ever been dealt with. Now flip it. Same throb, same hour. Except it's Edo-period Japan, sometime in the 1700s. No anesthetic. No dentist's office you can call at 9 a.m. No aspirin bottle in the cabinet. Just you, the pain, a house full of people trying to sleep through your groaning, and whatever your neighborhood happened to have already figured out. Here's the strange part. Somewhere in that same city, there is already a name for what's happening inside your tooth. There is already a shop that sells you something to rub on the pain. And if it gets bad enough, there is already a very specific kind of professional waiting to pull it out. One of 3 completely different kinds depending on how much money you have and how much of a spectacle you're willing to sit through. What they'd figured out is stranger, more organized, and more theatrical than anything you'd expect from ancient dentistry. Here's what most people assume. Ancient Japan had no real dental care. You got a toothache? You suffered. Maybe a monk prayed over you. The end. Feudal stoicism, samurai movie style. Grit your teeth, literally, and carry on. Here's the thing. That's almost the opposite of what actually happened. By the late Edo period, Japan had a structured, tiered dental care system with named professional categories, treating everything from toothache to full tooth loss. Not folk superstition, an actual profession, decades before Japan had ever seen a Western-trained dentist. Second assumption, that dental care, if it existed at all, was a luxury reserved for the wealthy. Also wrong. There was a version of it for nearly every income bracket, including a genuinely theatrical option for people who couldn't afford anything else. Somewhere between see a physician and suffer in silence, there was a middle tier involving sword tricks and a street crowd, which is not a sentence you expect to type while researching dental history. Third assumption, and this is the one that surprises people most, that false teeth are a Western invention Japan eventually imported once it modernized. It's the reverse. Japan was making fully functional dentures roughly 3 centuries before the West figured out how to do the same thing. Using a design principle, Western dentistry didn't reach until the 1800s. The country everyone assumes was catching up to Western dentistry had, at one point, already lapped it. So if ancient Japan wasn't doing nothing about a toothache, what exactly were they doing? To understand the toothache problem, you have to understand what people were already doing to their teeth every day. Because oral hygiene in Edo Japan was more advanced than the no dentist, no problem myth suggests. Commoners cleaned their teeth with a fusayoji, a thin willow branch with one end frayed into soft bristles, essentially a proto-toothbrush, paired with a tsumayoji, a slim wooden pick for getting between teeth. Shops that sold them were literally called yojiya, toothpick shops, and they were common enough that woodblock prints from the period show customers browsing them the way you'd browse a pharmacy aisle today, comparing bristle shapes the way you'd compare toothbrush firmness. And yet, cavities still happened, because a rice-heavy diet and 0 fluoride are a rough combination. Skeletal studies of Edo-period remains show extensive root surface decay, the kind caused by long-term gum recession exposing the root, rather than sudden damage from one bad meal. Picture yourself, in that world, running your tongue over a tooth that's just started to feel wrong, with absolutely no way to know yet how bad it's going to get. So when a tooth actually started to hurt, what did people believe was happening inside it? The same explanation you'd find across most of the ancient world, Japan included. A tiny worm burrowing inside the tooth, gnawing as it moved. When it moved, you felt pain. When it rested, the pain stopped. It's a wrong theory that happens to describe the experience of a toothache with eerie accuracy, which is probably why versions of it survived independently on 4 or 5 continents for literally thousands of years, from Mesopotamia to India to Japan, with no one civilization borrowing it from another. But belief in a toothworm didn't mean people just waited it out. It meant there was already a market for relief, and that market had organized itself into something with actual structure, actual professionals, and actual specialization. Before we go any further, I want to know what you think. If you had a toothache in Edo, Japan, and no money for the real option, would you have trusted the street performer spinning tops and swinging swords to sell you a cure? Or just waited it out? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. So, what actually went in your mouth while you waited for one of these 3 tiers to see you? In 2020, a research team led by Rikai Sawafuji analyzed ancient dental calculus, the calcified plaque still stuck to Edo-period teeth, using DNA metabarcoding, essentially reading genetic fragments preserved in centuries-old tartar. Buried in that plaque, traces of plants used specifically for pain relief, alongside evidence of rice, vegetables, and tobacco, confirming that people really were self-medicating with what they had on hand, not just praying it away. The historical record backs it up directly. A 1693 account by the scholar Hozumi describes people using resin from Japanese cypress trees as a toothache painkiller, applied straight to the aching area, centuries before clove oil became the go-to home remedy in the West. There was also moxa, burning a small cone of dried mugwort near or on specific points of the body, a Kampo medicine technique used for all kinds of pain, toothaches included. Here's a word you already know without realizing where it came from. Moxa, the term Western medicine still uses for this exact technique, comes directly from the Japanese word for the mugwort itself, mogusa. Dutch traders picked it up in Japan, brought it home, and it entered European medical vocabulary basically unchanged. Every time a Western acupuncturist says moxibustion, they're using a loan word lifted straight out of an Edo-period toothache remedy. Somewhere, a 17th century Dutch trader is owed a small amount of credit for half of modern alternative medicine's vocabulary. Here's the detail that actually rewrites dental history. If a tooth was too far gone and had to come out, the standard replacement, for anyone who could afford it, wasn't metal, and it wasn't porcelain. It was wood. Japanese denturists were making complete, functional wooden dentures as early as the first half of the 1500s, carved from boxwood based on a beeswax impression of the patient's own mouth. The oldest confirmed example belonged to a woman named Nakaoka Tei, who died in 1538. And this wasn't a crude wooden block jammed in as a placeholder. Researcher Kazuya Yoshida, who has physically reconstructed these dentures using period-accurate tools and materials, confirmed they used suction retention, the same physical principle modern dentures still rely on to stay in place without adhesive. Western dentistry didn't manage that trick until the second half of the 1800s. Japan was there roughly 300 years earlier, quietly, with a piece of carved boxwood. And the people making them weren't dental specialists to begin with in most cases. Many were Buddhist statue carvers and no mask makers, craftsmen who already knew how to carve a human face with anatomical precision, and simply pointed that same skill at a smaller, far more personal sculpture, your own mouth. One recorded denture was even made for Yagyu Munefuyu, a swordplay instructor to the Tokugawa shogun himself, proof that even the people closest to real political power still ended up with a hand-carved wooden mouth eventually. Here's the part that doesn't make it into the clever wooden dentures version of this story. Before you got the elegant hand-carved denture, someone had to remove the tooth that was killing you. And if you were a commoner going the cheap route, that someone might be the same person who just finished a top-spinning routine to attract a crowd. There was no anesthetic beyond whatever herbal painkiller you'd already tried, and whatever your own nerve could supply. The extraction itself was done with iron pliers, by hand, on a fully conscious patient, often in the open street, in front of the same crowd the charlatan had just finished entertaining. The performance wasn't separate from the procedure. It was the marketing for it. The crowd that gathered to watch the sword tricks became the audience for your extraction, whether you wanted spectators or not. By the end of the Edo period, dental historians Ono and Hisaka, writing in the Japanese Dental Science Review in 2013, describe a system with 3 distinct categories of provider, and which one treated you depended almost entirely on who you were. At the top, oral physicians, trained medical doctors who specialized in teeth, tongue, and throat, reserved almost exclusively for samurai and court nobility. If you were born into that class, a toothache got you an actual physician's attention, no different in spirit from a modern private specialist. Below them, denturists, tradespeople who handled toothache treatment, extractions, and the fabrication of wooden dentures for ordinary commoners. This was the closest thing to a regular neighborhood dentist Edo Japan had, a real respected trade, passed down and practiced for generations. And at the bottom of the ladder, the category that should not have worked and somehow did, charlatans. These were street performers first, medicine sellers second. They'd draw a crowd with sword-drawing tricks and top-spinning stunts, and once people were watching, they'd pitch toothache remedies and tooth powder to the audience. Some of them were pure showmen with a jar of dubious powder and nothing behind it. Others, according to the same research, actually picked up real extraction and denture-making skills along the way and became legitimately competent at the job. Imagine your dentist's origin story being traveling magician who got good at it eventually. And yet, if you had no money and a screaming tooth at midnight, that traveling magician might be the only option standing between you and another sleepless week. So, what did ancient Japanese people actually do about a toothache? Depending on who you were, one of 3 things. An oral physician if you were samurai or court nobility, a denturist if you were an ordinary commoner with some money saved, or a street charlatan, sword tricks, top spinning, and a jar of tooth powder if you had neither. Somewhere in that process, most people also reached for cypress resin or a mugwort moxa cone before it ever got as far as extraction. And if it did get that far, what came out the other side, for anyone who could afford it, was a hand-carved wooden denture, built with a suction retention technique the West wouldn't rediscover for another 3 centuries. The next time dental care feels expensive, or you put off calling because you already know what the bill's going to be, that split isn't a modern healthcare invention. Edo Japan had the exact same stratified system. A version of relief for the wealthy, a version for the merely comfortable, and a much rougher version for everyone else, performed in the street for the price of a jar of powder. The gap between good dental care and whatever you can afford isn't new. It's one of the oldest gaps there is. It's just that in Edo Japan, the cheap option came with a sword drawing demonstration attached. And the part that should genuinely change how you see this? None of it was random. The toothworm theory, wrong as it was, gave people a reason to act instead of just waiting. The 3-tier system, unequal as it was, meant almost nobody in that city was left with literally no option at all. And the wooden denture, 300 years ahead of its time, came from craftsmen who weren't even trying to invent dentistry. They were just very, very good at carving wood into the shape of something that used to be alive. So the next time that 3 a.m. throb wakes you up and you reach for the painkillers in your bathroom cabinet, you're doing the exact same thing someone in Edo, Japan was doing with cypress resin and a burning cone of mugwort. Same hour, same pain. Same instinct to make it stop. And if you think dental care in ancient Japan sounds complicated, wait until you hear what happened when a geisha, whose entire career depended on controlling exactly what she felt, actually fell for a client. That story is next. You're doing what every version of you has always done. You're just trying to make the ache stop.